In the previous video, we implemented an interval timer to limit the time a user has to play the game, and we identified that the computation of the game status is now not needed every second, but rather when a number is clicked or when the timer hits 0. To optimize this computation, we need to cache it. Let's do that. Instead of this .gameStatus as a function, I'm going to assume the game status is a fixed number that I have cached on the instance. This game status starts with playing. So in here, I'll introduce a game status instance property, and this one starts with playing. And now I need to change this game status, the cached copy of the computed value. I need to change that when needed. And I can do so in component will update. This lifecycle method happens right before the render method when the component is about to be updated, when the state of the component is different, or when the props of the component is different. So I actually conditionally here, I can compute the new game status if there is a need to. For example, I'll have an if statement here that says if the next state dot selected IDs array does not equal the current state selected IDs. Let's console log this value. To test that, we need to disable the timer for now, because the timer will also trigger the component will update. And let's test. The numbers are actually disabled. We did something wrong. Let's figure out what we did wrong. Game status. I'm not actually sure. Let's debug that. What is game status here? Oh, the reason we are seeing this problem is that we defined game status on the instance twice. Once it was the initial value, and also we still have the function here, game status. So let's call this function, instead of game status, let's call it calc game status, because that's exactly what it's going to do. Let me test now. Seems to be working. Let me clear that. And now remember what we did. In component will update, I am console logging if the selected IDs for the next state does not equal the selected IDs for the current state. So when we click on the number, we will see true. The previous selected IDs does not equal the next selected IDs when I click the numbers, because I am appending an item to the original array, and I am doing that without mutating the original array. So this condition will actually work for our case. If the next state selected IDs does not equal the current state selected IDs, or the next state dot remaining seconds equals 0, this is the only case where I need to recompute the game status. For these two cases, we need to compute the game status. Basically, this dot game status equal this dot calculate the game status one more time. Let me format this code. So this is the cache in play. I have a game status where I cache the value of the game status, and I have a calc game status where I calculate the new game status only when I need to, only when the selected IDs are different, or when the remaining seconds hit 0. However, for this to work, game status has to read from the new state, because we're no longer computing the game state on render. In here, we would still be computing on the previous state. So let's pass the new state here, the next state, to calculate game status, and make this game status depend on next state instead of the current state. So we're reading the state in game status twice. Replace that with next state, and I think that should work. So basically, when there is a condition for us to consider recomputing the game status, compute the game status based on the next state that is coming to this component. Let's test. The timer is on and it's rendering, and I can go here and win the game. That's normal. And remember, the timer will still hit the lost case, but it's working. Every time I actually need the game status to change, the condition will be invoked and it will change. And you can validate that with a console log statement here in calculate game status. So calc game status. So let's make sure that this calc game status only happen when needs to. So while the timer is ticking here, calculate game status is not actually being invoked. And when the timer hits 0, one calculate game status happens. Alternatively, only when I click, the calculate game status happen. So this is a much better way for caching the expensive computation. Of course, in our case, it wasn't really that expensive, but it's a thing that you can do to optimize expensive computations in your app, cache them, and only invalidate the cache when you need to. This also will allow us to fix the other problem. Basically, right here, when I re-invalidate the cache, if this .gameStatus is not playing, that's another case where I need to clear the interval. Clear the interval for this .interval ID, right? The minute the game status turns into either won or lost, I want to clear the timer. I don't need the timer to keep running so that when I win the game, the timer stops. One last thing we need to do, remember that we placed a to-do here somewhere. To-do, shuffle the random numbers. Because right now, winning the game is really easy. You just pick the first 4 numbers. So we need to shuffle those numbers. So in here, after computing a target, I need to shuffle the random numbers. And the easiest way to shuffle the array is really to use a library like Lodash, which has the shuffle function. But of course, I don't need to import the whole Lodash library just to use the shuffle function out of the Lodash. I can use Lodash micro modules to import just the shuffle function. So basically, we import shuffle from lodash.shuffle. So this will import only the shuffle function out of the Lodash library, which is what I'm interested in. And to use it in here, we can do something like shuffled random numbers equal shuffle, the function from Lodash, performed on this .random numbers. Just like that. And instead of using random numbers, let me look where we're using random numbers. So we actually need to change random numbers in these 2 places into shuffled random numbers. So in here and in here. And let's test. I don't have shuffle. This is what you get when you have an error like that. I need to npm install shuffle. So npm install lodash.shuffle. Try now. All right, so 15 does not equal to 3 plus 7 plus 10 plus 1. We probably need this, and that. And I barely hit the time target. But seems like the shuffle is actually working.